This is good enough for a worthless employee. My wife and I were invited to a gathering at her workplace. However, when we arrived at the venue, we found trash cans placed where our chairs should have been. Confused by the situation, we were approached by my wife's supervisor, who was grinning slyly. I prepared something just right for a worthless employee like you. I couldn't contain my anger at such a demeaning attitude, as if he was denying my wife's very worth. When he even started mocking someone we both respected, I finally reached my breaking point. Then, my usually gentle wife, visibly angry, turned to a junior employee and said, "Could you call Mr. Irwin, please?" A short while later, Mr. Irwin arrived, and we greeted him. Upon seeing the situation before him, Mr. Irwin asked what was going on. The truth he revealed shortly after left the supervisor pale as a sheet. My name is Thomas. I'm a 56-year-old business owner, living with my wife. My wife, Emily, is 6 years younger than me and currently works for a different company than mine. I met Emily about 30 years ago through a mutual friend. Despite the slight age difference, we hit it off due to our shared hobbies, and here we are today. We have 2 sons, both of whom are married and have their own families. I plan to have my eldest son take over my business one day, so he's currently learning the ropes at my company. There's a place I go almost every weekend without fail. Margaret, thanks again for your help today. I really appreciate you coming to lend a hand as always. Her name is Margaret, a 70-year-old woman who runs a bento shop. She used to run the shop with her husband, but he passed away from an illness a few years ago, and now she manages it alone. Margaret has been helping me since I was a student, often selling me bentos at a discount when I was struggling financially. She's helped many people like me, and her shop, loved by regulars and locals alike, has continued to thrive. On this day, I was helping out as usual when a man walked into the shop around noon. He looked around the shop and sneered, saying, "What is this place? It's so outdated." This rude man's name is George, and he's Emily's supervisor. At 34 years old, he's already a department head in sales. His wife, Grace, is the daughter of the company's president, and it's said he'll take over the company one day. But no matter what his position, I can't overlook such disrespectful comments about the shop. So I decided to speak up. "Excuse me, but isn't it rude to be so disrespectful right when you walk in? Oh, so this shop insults its customers now? I guess when the shop's like this, the employees are just as low class," George said, without the slightest hint of remorse. Judging by his attitude, this must be his first time here. How could someone act like this in a place they've never been to before? I almost want to respond with exactly the words he said. Furthermore, George continued speaking in his condescending attitude without changing. "I came to buy a bento at Grace's request, but you better serve decent bento. If you serve something bad, this shop is finished." George said that, grinning down at me in a scornful manner. Even though he shouldn't have such authority, his behavior made it seem like he thought the world revolved around him. Just because he has the position of next president, I can't like someone who acts so blatantly arrogant. I was so pissed off that I tried to retort, but Margaret stopped me. Then, with a gentle smile, she said to George, "I'm sorry if the shop looks old and offends you. I'll make the bento cheaper, so could you forgive us with that?" George, seemingly pleased by Margaret's obsequious attitude, chuckled and glanced over, saying, "The old woman understands your position much better. Hey, old man, you should properly learn customer service attitude." Saying that, he took the handed bento and left the shop. To me, who was still irritable, Margaret said with a smile, "You shouldn't take such a thing seriously." People who are just conceited about their position should be let off easily. I see, that's enlightening. Seeing that Margaret was completely unfazed, I couldn't help but smile wryly, thinking I still have a long way to go. After returning home, I told Emily about what happened at the bento shop, and she showed a look of exasperation. Apparently, George also behaves arrogantly at the company. She has warned him a few times, but it seems he lashed out instead. Conversely, he behaves nicely in front of superiors and grace. The other employees don't speak up strongly because George is the next president, but internally, they don't think highly of him. Since he is going to lead the company someday, it would be a problem if he doesn't calm down a bit. Saying that, Emily sighed. Then, after some time passed, one day, a meeting was being held at Emily's company, and President Irwin insisted that I attend as well. Of course, with no reason to refuse, I decided to attend the meeting. On the day of the meeting, upon entering the venue, we greeted the acquaintances who were also invited and headed to our assigned seats. But in the next instant, an unbelievable scene confronted us. To our surprise, the chairs that should have been at our seats were missing, replaced by trash cans. What is this? Emily, have you heard something? No, nothing. Even as a joke, this is too much. As we were puzzled, George approached us. Finally, you showed up, you worthless employee. So, you're the old man of the bento shop, right? You can't be the husband of this old lady. Can you? George said that, looking down on us. Furthermore, grinning widely, he began to talk about the trash can. What do you think? The surprise I prepared was a huge hit, wasn't it? Was he serious about saying that? This isn't a surprise, it's just harassment, and no matter how you think about it, it's nothing but unpleasant. With George showing no signs of remorse, Emily confronted him. George, why are you doing this to us? Of course, it's obvious, isn't it? I prepared the perfect seats for a worthless employee like you. Having a trash can as a seat is just absurd. His statements, as if denying our very personality, made us unable to contain our anger. So this is the seat. Don't mess with me. This is enough for a worthless employee. George remained unmoved by my angry shout and said that. I have many things I want to say about his behavior and attitude, but above all, it's infuriating that he has been calling Emily a worthless employee since earlier. In the first place, Emily has been working diligently at the current company for nearly 30 years. Though it's my own opinion, it's no exaggeration to call her a significant contributor who has supported the sales department for many years. In fact, there are no shortage of junior employees who visit me out of admiration for her. I couldn't accept someone calling her a worthless employee. Tell me exactly why my wife deserves to be called worthless. Pressing him further, George looked down on me and said with contempt, "This old woman keeps nitpicking at the way I do things. Anyone who talks back to their boss is automatically worthless." What an immature response. Emily has been trying to correct him because he's supposed to be the future leader of the company. Yet he dismisses it as backtalk and resorts to this kind of harassment. It made me seriously question if someone like him should ever become CEO. Just then, Emily, who had been silent until now, spoke up with a serious expression. "George, you're going to be leading this company. If you behave like this, no one will follow you, and you won't be able to protect your employees." Her words were not meant to be confrontational. Emily has often expressed her affection for the company, and she was genuinely concerned for its future. At the same time, those words were meant out of concern for George's future. However, it seemed that he didn't understand that at all, as he clicked his tongue in annoyance and said irritably, "Why can't you just take a hint? It's you who's disrupting the department by constantly defying your superior." If his claim were true, no one would respect Emily. But in reality, she's the one who's truly admired, not him. I'm sure if you asked anyone in the sales department, they wouldn't have a bad word to say about her. Is it really necessary to make her a target just because she offered a little criticism? As I was pondering this, George said something utterly shocking. "Honestly, I've always thought you were in the way. I'm supposed to be the head of this department, but everyone likes you instead. And it pisses me off." I finally understood. He's simply jealous of Emily. Given his position, no one likely criticizes him much, but he's not genuinely respected like Emily is. Listening to her juniors who visit us, it's clear they don't think highly of George. He must have been bothered by someone more respected than him speaking up, which is why he resorted to such petty harassment. But of course, I couldn't possibly accept this behavior. I finally reached my breaking point and raised my voice. "Enough! What you did here and at the bento shop is unbelievably out of line." In response to my words, George retorts like this: "Oh, please. A guy who's been cast out by society has no right to lecture someone like me. You're probably working at that bento shop because you can't find a job anywhere else, right?" It seems he assumed I was an employee at Margaret's shop. But even if I were, insulting a place that had nothing to do with this was beyond forgivable. Ignoring my reaction, George continued, "A husband who has to rely on a worthless employee is just as worthless, right? You weren't even invited to this gathering in the first place. I never expected him to go this far." Even Emily, who is usually calm, seemed to have reached her limit. She turned to a nearby junior employee and said, "Could you call Mr. Irwin, please?" The junior immediately left to fetch Mr. Irwin. "Oh, you're going to tattle to Mr. Irwin? I'm the future CEO, and who do you think is going to side with an old woman like you?" George had a triumphant smile on his face. He was completely unaware that he was about to be brought down to rock bottom. A short while later, a man approached us. It was none other than the company president, Mr. Benjamin Irwin. At his arrival, the employees around us immediately bowed their heads. "Relax, everyone, no need to be so formal." But more importantly, the moment Mr. Irwin, the company president, started to say something, he turned his gaze towards me, slowly walked over, and suddenly threw his arm around my shoulder. "Tom, you made it. I was ready to drag you out of your house if you hadn't." "Oh, come on, like I'd miss it with our history?" "But seriously, Benjamin, have you put on more weight again?" As we exchanged this light-hearted banter, George, who had been so full of himself just moments ago, stood there with his mouth agape, completely stunned. "Mr. Irwin, do you know this man? Hey! How dare you refer to our major shareholder as this man?" George's eyes widened in surprise at Mr. Irwin's words. "Yes, in fact, I am the major shareholder of this company and have been Mr. Irwin's close friend since our college days. Back in our student days, when we were both studying business management, we quickly hit it off and became inseparable. We pushed each other to achieve our dream of owning our own companies, and now, we both have. Because of our bond, when his company went public, I invested by buying shares. By the way, it was Mr. Irwin who introduced me to Emily, saying she was an outstanding employee with a good heart, and that's how we met. Because of his endorsement, I knew for certain that Emily was a key contributor to the company." Now understanding the situation, George's face turned pale. And rightly so. The person he had been belittling and mocking turned out to be someone vital to the company. Mr. Irwin then noticed the trash cans placed at our seats and asked why they were there. Fearing for his position, George quickly spoke up. "Hey! Who set up this prank? It's disrespectful to the major shareholder." I couldn't help but feel astonished at how easily he flipped his attitude, having looked down on us just moments ago. It was clear from the cold stares around him that others felt the same. He was probably hoping to pin the blame on someone else and pretend he wasn't involved. But neither Emily nor I were going to let that happen. "George, stop pretending. You're the one who orchestrated all of this, aren't you?" "What? You have no proof." At this point, his denials were beyond pathetic. With so many witnesses around, any attempt to cover up the truth was pointless. Then, a female employee spoke up, saying she had evidence, and pulled out her smartphone. She had recorded the entire incident. This employee was one of Emily's subordinates, who often visited our home. We treated her like a daughter, as she was close in age to our sons. Apparently, she couldn't stand by and watch us be harassed, so she secretly recorded everything as evidence. As George's self-sabotage was laid bare, he began to panic, while Mr. Irwin glared at him. Just then, Grace arrived, bringing Margaret with her. "What's going on here? What's all this commotion about?" "Nothing but trouble. George has done something outrageous," Mr. Irwin replied, and he began explaining what had transpired. Grace sighed, as if she had expected something like this. Meanwhile, George turned to her and asked, "Hey, Grace, why did you bring that old woman from the bento shop here?" "Why?" "Because Margaret is an important person. She's my father's benefactor and she provides bento for our company cafeteria." Yes, just like me, Mr. Irwin had also been supported by Margaret during his student days. He had always said that if he ever started a company, he wanted to serve her bento in his cafeteria. That's how deeply he felt indebted to her, and he followed through on that promise. Even after becoming president, Mr. Irwin continued to visit her shop regularly, and Grace had known Margaret since she was a child. "George, Margaret told me everything. Apparently, when I asked you to buy a bento the other day, you insulted her, Tom, and the shop." "And no, that's not." Margaret might have said she'd let it slide at the time, but she made sure to tell those who needed to know. "How could you look down on so many people and think that's acceptable?" Even George couldn't afford to act nonchalant in the face of Mr. Irwin's anger. He was visibly cowering. As if that wasn't enough, Grace glared at George and began to reveal a shocking truth. "George, don't you have something to confess? Like about your relationships with other women, perhaps?" Her words caused a stir in the room. Everyone except George, who was now pale with fear, was stunned. Grace then began to share the details. Recently, Grace had noticed that George had been coming home late and behaving suspiciously. Suspicious of his behavior, Grace hired an investigator, which led to the discovery that he was involved with another woman. The woman was a hostess from a club he frequented, and there was solid evidence showing the two of them going to hotels and taking trips together. Moreover, the audio data of conversations between George and his partner contained shocking content. He had been planning to divorce Grace and be with his partner after becoming the company president. Everyone was stunned by the sheer audacity of his scheme. "This is all a lie. Someone's trying to set me up," George protested desperately. "Oh, really? Then can you explain where the money you expensed as company costs actually went?" Grace asked, her tone sharp. The room buzzed with renewed tension. Apparently, There was an amount that had been expensed without a clear explanation of its use. It was filed under George's name, with the details listed as entertainment for clients and travel expenses. But it was revealed that these were fabricated. It was likely that he had embezzled the funds to spend on his mistress. George, sweating profusely, averted his gaze, unable to defend himself. It was clear that everything Grace had accused him of was true. The thought of being mocked by such a man only fueled my anger. "You've spent so much time belittling others, but it seems the real worthless employee isn't my wife, it's you." George had no retort this time, his silence speaking volumes. Mr. Irwin and Grace, now visibly enraged, confronted him. "You deceived my daughter, disrespected others, and brought harm to this company. You have no place here. If you want a divorce so badly, you'll get it. But don't ever show your face to us again." Despite George's desperate apologies, there was no forgiveness. He was forcibly removed from the venue. Mr. Irwin then went around apologizing to the other employees and guests for the disruption. After things had settled down, I approached Mr. Irwin and Grace to check on them. Surprisingly, they seemed to be in good spirits. In fact, they were relieved to have uncovered the truth and dealt with the situation before it escalated further. Mr. Irwin had always been unshakable, and it was clear that Grace had inherited this trait as well. As we talked, Margaret, who had been watching us, spoke up. "You two have really grown up. Nowadays, it seems I'm the one being helped by you all the time. We're sorry for making you uncomfortable, Margaret." Mr. Irwin and Grace bowed their heads to Margaret once again, but she just laughed, saying she was satisfied because everyone had protected her. And it was refreshing to see George put in his place. In the end, George was arrested for embezzlement. Naturally, he was fired from the company, and his mistress left him as well. Mr. Irwin made it clear that there would be no out-of-court settlement, so George's fate would be decided in court. A few years later, after passing my business on to my son, Emily, and I took over Margaret's bento shop. We had been considering this for a while since we often helped out at the shop, and with Margaret wanting to retire, she was happy to let us take over. Our goal is to preserve the flavors Margaret created and to make the shop even more beloved by the local community. And so, a new chapter in our lives began. "Oh, Ronald! Help me!" The desperate cry of a young girl echoed in my ears. I rushed toward her without thinking, offering the handkerchief I had been holding to my mouth. I didn't feel anything, not even the heat. I was solely focused on saving her. But then, misfortune struck me. When I realized it, the girl was gone, and I woke up in a hospital bed. My parents were crying and yelling at me. I had survived. But the girl was. After that, I became a firefighter. I dedicated myself to saving as many lives as possible, rushing to every emergency. Yet, every time, my soul trembles. I'm scared, it's hot, I want to run away. But if I don't overcome this, I won't be myself anymore. Into my broken heart came a woman. "How did you get this scar?" "My name is Ronald. I'm a 28-year-old firefighter. I haven't dated anyone since I broke up with my girlfriend in my sophomore year of high school. It's because people get creeped out and stay away from me when they see my right arm. My right arm, from the elbow down, is covered in red and black scars. It doesn't hurt anymore. However, both adults and children are equally frightened when they see it. In winter, I can hide it by wearing long sleeves. But in summer, when I have to wear short sleeves, some children cry at the sight of it. So, I started wearing long sleeves even in summer. Not just my arm, but I have scars on my face too, so I usually wear a mask and a hood pulled low over my head. I must look like a suspicious person to anyone who sees me. I avoid contact with others and try to live as harmlessly as possible. That was my biggest goal in life now. I don't think I was always like this. I used to be a completely different person. Hey, Ronald. Hurry up, let's go. My colleague's voice snapped me back to reality. About 80% of firefighters in the country work on a rotating shift schedule. We work 24-hour shifts, from 8:30 a.m. to 8:30 a.m. the next day, followed by a day off, and then another 24-hour shift. I followed the same routine, alternating between duty and off days. It was midnight. Apparently, there was a call from a restaurant, and we headed to the scene. By the time we arrived, a crowd had already gathered, peering inside anxiously. Every time I stand on the scene like this, my heart pounds loudly. I have a flashback to the scene I saw that day. But somehow, I managed to hold myself together, resisting the urge to collapse. The caller reported that the staff and customers have already evacuated. No one is left inside, so let's get right to extinguishing the fire. The fire was quickly put out. Fortunately, the restaurant was isolated, preventing the flames from spreading and minimizing the damage. This is my everyday life. After successfully completing the day's mission, I returned home around 10 a.m. and collapsed onto my bed. Unable to resist the pull of gravity, my eyelids slowly closed. And within that darkness, I heard the voice of the girl. Cough, help, help me. Watch out. I jumped out of bed, panting, staring at the wall of my room. Sweat beaded on my forehead. The scene I witnessed that day is etched deep into my memory, whether I like it or not. Every time, it's like this, and I can't stand it. Whenever I fall asleep after fighting a fire, that's the first dream I always have. It's a painful memory I'd rather erase, but it's also the event from that night when I decided to become a firefighter. The reason I injured my right arm was because of something that happened long before I became a firefighter. It was a hot, sweltering tropical night. I woke up suddenly to the smell of something burning. The clock showed the dead of night, 2 a.m. Still only 2 a.m. I mumbled, my head groggy, debating whether to go back to sleep. Then, I realized it. The smell of burning, and this feeling of drowsiness. There was no doubt a fire had started somewhere. I somehow managed to get up and check outside the window. The first floor of the house next door was glowing red. Oh no! I immediately ran downstairs to wake my sleeping parents. Both of them, like me, were suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning, and their consciousness was foggy. I managed to wake my father and had him carry my mother out. Fortunately, the fire hadn't spread to our house yet, but if we had been a moment later, it could have been disastrous for our family. Gradually, bystanders began to gather, and the fire department, which my father had called, arrived. But then, I noticed something. There was a little girl looking at us from a second-floor window. She was too terrified to scream. Even without hearing her voice, I knew she was begging for help. The firefighters noticed her and were about to start the rescue, but my body moved on its own. Stop, it's dangerous, go back. I heard voices shouting, but I charged into the sea of flames without thinking. Covering my mouth with a handkerchief to avoid inhaling too much smoke, I rushed up to the second floor. There, in what seemed like a child's bedroom, was the girl. Please help. The moment she saw me, she clung to me and began sobbing loudly. I held her tightly and hurried down the stairs. And that's when it happened. With a deafening roar, a dark shadow fell over us. That's when I lost consciousness. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in a hospital bed. My parents scolded me terribly. Especially my mother, her anger was beyond description. I even imagined horns growing on her head like a demon. That's how reckless I had been. At 18, in my senior year of high school, I had to give up on taking the college entrance exams. After that, I managed to go through rehabilitation and eventually got discharged. Luckily, I didn't have any major lasting injuries. But my right arm was left scarred. Apparently, when the burned, decaying furniture fell, it landed on me and the girl. Fortunately, thanks to my reflexes, I avoided a direct hit, but my right arm was injured when I used it to shield myself from the falling furniture. They said it was a miracle I got away with just a minor injury. That's why, despite the severity of how it looks, the pain wasn't so bad. Not getting seriously injured, that alone was enough. However, this would eventually turn my life upside down. People began to feel uneasy when they saw my scars, and I could no longer attend classes. I ended up going to the school nurse's office and started thinking about my future. That's when I made a decision. I want to become a firefighter. I want to enroll in a fire academy. My parents were shocked when they heard this. My mother was so surprised she almost fell over. They probably thought that what happened that day had become a trauma for me. But that wasn't the case. I had felt something well up from deep within my chest at that time. Remembering the girl I saved with my own body, I realized how proud and wonderful it was to have a job where you could help people. By the way, the girl was only slightly dazed from inhaling smoke. She hadn't been injured. By shielding her, I was able to save a life. That was what sparked my interest in becoming a firefighter. Naturally, my parents opposed the idea. Saving lives sometimes means you have to sacrifice your own. They told me not to make such a decision so lightly. It was understandable. I knew that very well. But my determination was firm. Eventually, I was allowed to enter the fire academy. Just thinking back on those days, living under strict rules in a fully residential school makes me feel queasy. But it was because of those tough days that I got to witness the bravery of firefighters risking their lives for others. I tried to make sure my training days were not wasted. However, instinct is ingrained deep in your soul. Every time I see the scene of a fire, my legs freeze, and the images from that day flash back. Even if my mind tells me I'm okay, my soul rejects it. That's how it feels. Well, there's no point in dwelling on it. More importantly, I wonder if she's doing well. No one answers my muttered words. The girl I saved moved away after I was discharged from the hospital, and I have no information about her. I think her parents were terrible people. Her father went out every night, and her mother, resentful of him, ignored him, making the house feel gloomy. I didn't see it firsthand, but I overheard my parents talking about it. Living next door to her, I treated her like a real little sister. Her name was Caitlin. Caitlin, let's go to the park. Wait up, Ronald. Because her parents were like that, my parents and I were really worried about Caitlin. From her parents' perspective, they probably thought it was lucky that we were all playing with her and feeding her. They likely thought they'd rather spend on themselves than feed their own child. I'm sure that's what they thought. We knew this, but we still cared for Caitlin. My mother, after years of fertility treatments, had me in her late 30s. So, not having her dream of a daughter fulfilled made Caitlin even more precious to her. Not family, but not a stranger either. That was the relationship between my family and Caitlin. In the end, I lost track of her after that day. Sigh. Why does it always have to be like this? I'm really pathetic. I let out a slow sigh and crawled back under the covers. After that, I slept like a log. The next time I woke up, it was around 5 p.m. The sky had turned a deep red, and I saw crows returning to the forest, cawing as they went. I hadn't eaten anything since coming back, and hunger was starting to make me feel sick. I opened the refrigerator, only to find it completely empty. Living alone with such an irregular lifestyle, there's no one to go grocery shopping for me. I thought about ordering delivery, but I couldn't decide what I wanted, so I pulled up my hood and headed outside. Even though it was a hot summer day, I must have stood out quite a bit dressed like that. People passing by shot strange looks my way. But I was used to it by now. While I was casually picking out some meat at the supermarket, a woman standing next to me said, "You might want to wait a bit longer. Some items will go on sale soon." Ha! When I turned to look, she was smiling brightly like the sun. Judging by the uniform peeking out from under her hoodie, she seemed like a high school student. It's not particularly unusual for a high schooler to be at a supermarket, but hearing her talk about a sale caught me off guard. Just as she said, music began playing, signaling the start of a sale. I usually buy chicken breasts to save money, but since the prices had dropped, I decided to get some pork belly and added some yakisoba noodles to my basket, thinking I might make yakisoba tonight. Then, once again, that high school girl stood beside me and said, "If you're looking for noodles, there's a store a little further ahead that's cheaper." Aha! Feeling annoyed, I tried to ignore her and walk away, but she suddenly grabbed my arm. Wondering what she was doing, I glared at her. She immediately let go of my arm and raised both hands beside her face. "Sorry, you just looked a bit like someone I know." I didn't mean to be a bother. I'm sorry. I watched her walk away, shoulders slumped, with a puzzled expression on my face. A bright smile and a cheerful personality. She was walking a path completely opposite to mine. There was no way we could know each other. That day, I went home with that thought in mind and enjoyed my chicken yakisoba noodles while watching TV. So, why are you here? A few days later, I ran into her again at the store where she had told me the noodles were cheaper. "You remembered what I told you. But you know, if you eat yakisoba noodles all the time, your diet will become unbalanced. Mind your own business." But she didn't seem to give up. For some reason, she followed me around, suggesting dishes and putting things into my basket one after another. As I watched her in bewilderment, a question that had been on my mind suddenly slipped out. "Where are your parents? Why are you shopping alone?" She stopped moving instantly. A moment of silence fell over us, but then she turned back and smiled softly. "I live alone. When I was little, I got separated from my parents due to some circumstances. Now, my relatives provide me with financial support. So I live by myself. But it's fun, so it's okay." She said it, but her expression didn't seem to match her words at all. Caitlin's face and the girl standing before me overlapped perfectly in my mind. The way Caitlin looked up at me in this girl's eyes, they were exactly the same. No way. Without realizing it, I raised my arm and reached out toward her. She glanced at my right arm and muttered, "That scar." I snapped back to reality, quickly pulling my arm back and tugging my sleeve down hard. She saw my scar. She's going to be disgusted. Thinking that, I was about to turn away from her when she spoke up first. "Ronald. It really is you, Ronald." The high school girl, no, Caitlin, shouted, her eyes brimming with tears. People around us started to look at me suspiciously. I sighed, told her we'd talk later, and quickly paid for my groceries before heading outside. Carrying Caitlin's bags as well, I walked down a long, straight path. Caitlin followed a step behind me, maintaining a small distance, silently walking along. As we reached a fork in the road, Caitlin spoke. "Ronald, will you come to my place next time?" "What are you talking about?" "Of course not. Please. There's something I need to tell you, something I have to say." Her eyes didn't seem to be lying. They were so clear, so beautiful, that they seemed to draw me in. In the end, I gave in to Caitlin's persistence and promised to come by tomorrow. Coincidentally, I happened to have 2 days off in a row, but what were the odds of that happening? Thinking about that, I found myself visiting Caitlin the next day. When Caitlin learned about the unhealthy lifestyle I'd been living, she prepared a nutritionally balanced meal for me. There was eggplant, which I disliked. "No way. You have to eat it. You can't be picky." She seemed to read my mind, catching me off guard. However, when I tasted Caitlin's cooking, the unpleasant taste of eggplant that I had always avoided was hardly noticeable. I was so impressed that, before I knew it, I had finished the whole plate. Caitlin smiled triumphantly. After finishing her dinner, Caitlin sat down beside me and continued the story from that day. "Ronald, you've changed a lot. Back then, you seemed brighter. 10 years have passed, such changes are only natural." A brief silence fell, but Caitlin began to speak hesitantly. That night, when I shielded her and lost consciousness, she was safe but kept calling my name over and over. The firefighters rescued her and brought her to safety. It seems the fire was caused by her father's carelessness with a cigarette. As usual, he had been drinking at home, and when he went out, he left the cigarette burning. I'd never hated my parents, not even once. Sure, my dad was probably a deadbeat, but he never did anything to harm me. He just wasn't interested in me. And Mom, she stayed at home, even when Dad went out at night, because she didn't want to leave me alone. It seemed like she thought as long as you and your family looked after me, she only needed to take care of the minimum. Yeah, we all understood that. But I see, your mother did have at least a basic sense of responsibility, even if it was minimal. Caitlin chuckled softly. Yeah, I guess so. But that day, my mom had a seizure due to her chronic illness. Fortunately, she was rescued by the firefighters before me, so she was safe. Caitlin's expression darkened. Her father, as usual, was out and wasn't caught in the fire. Her mother was found collapsed at the entrance by the firefighters and was quickly taken outside and sent to the hospital. However, Caitlin, who was asleep on the second floor, wasn't discovered right away. That's when I, a high school student at the time, recklessly rushed in and rescued her. Caitlin didn't suffer any major injuries, but because she had inhaled smoke, she was taken to the hospital. They found no serious issues, and she was discharged 3 days later. However, it wasn't her parents who took her in but her maternal relatives. After that incident, her parents had a massive argument and ended up divorcing. Her mother deeply regretted that she hadn't cared for Caitlin properly and had endangered her life. She entrusted Caitlin to her relatives. That was the outcome for Caitlin's family. I'm sorry for wrongly assuming your parents were terrible and saying such things. It's okay. Compared to most parents, they were deadbeats, so I don't mind. My mom just realized things too late. After that day, when I was 7, what happened became a trauma, and I spent quite some time withdrawn. After being taken in by relatives, Caitlin was a shut-in through elementary and middle school. She said there were times she wanted to see me. But knowing that I was injured because I had protected her, she felt she had no face to meet me and never reached out. We were only neighbors, so we hadn't exchanged personal contact information. However, Caitlin said she happened to see me in town one day and felt compelled to approach me. Well, if someone dresses like such a suspicious person, they're bound to stand out, right? At first, I thought you were some creepy guy. But I couldn't stop thinking about those eyes I saw peeking out from under the hood. They looked just like Ronald's. I had never regretted these scars, not once. That's precisely why I chose to become a firefighter. But people who don't know the story furrow their brows when they see my arm. One time, a mother I didn't know told me to stay away from her child because I looked creepy. My scars were proof that I had saved a life, a badge of honor, if you will. But over time, they became swallowed by a wave of negative emotions. And so, gradually, I started to close off my heart. When I told her this, Caitlin looked at me with a serious expression and said, "Even if you've been exposed to those kinds of looks and your legs have frozen up at the scene, you're still working as a firefighter, aren't you? That means you still see those scars as a badge of honor, don't you?" Looking into her sincere eyes, I heard something inside me begin to crumble. The door that had shut my heart so tightly shattered into pieces. You're right. I have never once regretted saving you, Caitlin. These scars are the marks of victory I got for saving my dear friend. And yet, I've closed off my heart like this. As my shoulders began to shake slowly, Caitlin gently embraced me. She rubbed my back softly, as if comforting a child. Just like my late parents had once done for me, and like I had done for young Caitlin, now Caitlin was doing the same for me. "Sorry, can I lean on your shoulder for a bit? Ronald, sometimes it's okay to cry." Who knows how much time passed after that? I knew I couldn't just stay in Caitlin's apartment forever, so I decided to head back home. Caitlin looked at me with a slightly forlorn expression, her eyes like those of an abandoned puppy. Seeing that look brought back memories. After having dinner at my house, when Caitlin's mother returned from work to take her home, she would look at me with that same expression. I narrowed my eyes slightly and gently patted her head. "Ronald, you know, I always wanted to say something if I ever met you again. I just wanted to say, thank you for saving me that day." At that moment, I felt a weight lift off my heart. It felt like that, somehow. The next day, when I arrived at work as usual, my coworkers looked at me with curious expressions. "What is it?" "Well, you seem different somehow. Up until now, you had a kind of a dark aura around you. What is that?" I'm not a middle schooler with a delusion complex. At that, my coworker burst into laughter and continued getting ready. It wasn't just him, my boss and my juniors also asked me the same question. I knew it myself. Reuniting with Caitlin and hearing her gratitude for what happened that day. That alone was enough to save my heart. If I hadn't saved Caitlin and gotten these scars back then, maybe my life would have been completely different. I might have gone to college, gotten a good job, married a girlfriend. I'd considered those things, too. But the moment she thanked me yesterday, my heart was finally freed from the past. After that, I noticed a change in myself. Until now, every time I went to a scene, my soul would scream no, trying to take control of my body, but that stopped entirely. Though my heart and soul had been disconnected, they now felt unified. In my heart, I wanted to save as many lives as possible, just like when I saved Caitlin. In my soul, I never wanted to experience such fear again. Those two conflicting thoughts, like water and oil, had now blended together perfectly. Of course, there is still fear. Being a firefighter is a dangerous job, constantly on the edge of life and death. But there isn't a hint of negative emotion anymore. All I had was a sense of duty. "Ronald." To the right. Got it. I coordinated well with my colleagues, handling firefighting and rescue operations. And so, the years passed. Ronald, if you do that again, I'll be mad. Alright, I'm sorry. The reason I was being scolded was because I had secretly pushed the green peppers, my next least favorite after eggplant, to the side of my plate. Caitlin, seeing this, immediately reacted, scolding me with a stern face as if she had grown horns like a demon. Recently, I've been spending more time with Caitlin. Caitlin turned 20 and is currently a second-year university student. She still receives support from her relatives, but she's also very smart and is attending a nearby university on a scholarship. The Caitlin I remember was the little girl who would tug on my clothes with her tiny hands, asking me to take her to the park. But now, she's grown into a fine young woman who even cooks meals for me like this. I'm sure Caitlin will make a wonderful wife someday. When I thought that, a pang of pain hit my chest. I didn't know why, but the thought of Caitlin getting married somehow didn't sit right with me. It was a strange feeling. Oblivious to my thoughts, Caitlin kept piling green peppers onto my plate. Hey, I don't need this many. This is punishment for pushing them aside. Unable to argue, I quietly ate the green peppers. The bitterness spread in my mouth, but because Caitlin had seasoned them well, swallowing them wasn't too hard. After I managed to finish, Caitlin pulled a beer out of the refrigerator. I'm not drinking yet. Oh, come on. Are you still treating me like a kid? I'm an adult now. I can drink alcohol. She puffed her cheeks in a playful pout. She had just celebrated her birthday recently. Thinking about that, I felt how quickly time had passed. Because of my job, I have to be ready for emergencies. So, even when I'm off duty, I don't drink, but I had no reason to stop her from drinking. Caitlin took a swig of the beer with a hearty gulp. She drank quite well. It seemed she had a strong tolerance for alcohol, perhaps because of her father, who used to drink heavily but never got drunk. My dad loved to drink, remember? He could drink a lot and never get drunk, even though my mom couldn't handle alcohol at all. She said this, smiling with her cheeks slightly flushed. As I sipped my non-alcoholic beer and chatted, Caitlin made a surprising proposal. Hey, Ronald, why don't we live together? I spat out the non-alcoholic beer I was drinking. Hey, that's gross. You said something weird. I took a deep breath to calm myself down. Caitlin, perhaps a little tipsy, began to speak more honestly than usual. To me, you'll always be my big brother. Is it strange to want to live with family? Even though I live apart from my mom now, I still feel lonely. Apparently, Caitlin's mother, out of guilt, hasn't shown herself in front of Caitlin since the incident. But Caitlin sometimes receives letters from her through her relatives. She showed them to me. Written in elegant handwriting, they expressed a mother's feelings for her daughter. You realize what's important only after you've lost it. That's what Mom said. In her own way, she seems to have always loved me. When I was little, I adored you and your family more than my own parents because you cared for me. But now that I'm an adult, I understand. Mom just doesn't have worldly wisdom, but she truly loved me. With that, Caitlin held her mother's letter close to her heart, as if it were precious. What her mother did might not be something easily forgiven, though. It may sound like a touching story because Caitlin understands and forgives. But the reality remains that her mother left her daughter in the care of another family. Still, I was grateful to Caitlin's mother. Not only for giving birth to Caitlin but also for trusting us enough to leave her daughter in our care. Because of that trust, Caitlin and I were able to form a strong bond and reunite even after 10 years. So, I decided to stop saying anything about her mother. "Will do when you graduate from university." "What?" Seeing Caitlin's exaggerated surprise, I couldn't help but smile. A few more years passed after that. I turned 35, and Caitlin was now 24. It had been 2 years since she graduated from university and started working. She seemed to have gotten used to her job and had even begun complaining about it recently. Listen to this. "Today, my manager, Tim." All right, go take a bath first." Reluctantly, Caitlin headed to the bathroom. After Caitlin graduated from university, as promised, we started living together. And there was another change. I had retired from being an active firefighter. But I hadn't switched to a completely unrelated job. I was now working as an instructor at the fire academy, training the next generation of firefighters. Although I still had a lot to learn, I worked hard every day not to let down the former colleagues and seniors who commended me for this position. Then, Caitlin came out of the shower with her hair still wet. "You'll catch a cold. Come here." Without saying a word, Caitlin sat down in front of me. Drying Caitlin's long, glossy hair had become a routine for us. Though Caitlin seemed quite put together, she had some absent-minded tendencies. Mixing up sugar and salt, tripping over nothing, etc. And sometimes, like now, coming out without drying her hair. Seeing this, I had taken it upon myself to dry her hair with a hairdryer. She's quite a handful, little sister of mine. As her hair dried, I lowered the hairdryer to a gentler setting, and Caitlin, in a cheerful mood, asked, "So, have you thought about my question from the other day?" "No, I haven't." "Oh, come on. How long are you going to make me wait?" "You only have one more day." I ran the comb through her hair, saying, yeah. And finally, I realized what that strange feeling was. While I called her my little sister, a different emotion was beginning to take hold of my heart. There was no doubt that I was becoming aware of Caitlin as a woman. Not just as the little sister who always followed me around, but as a woman in her own right. Even though there was a significant age gap between us, 24 and 35 are both mature ages. Caitlin must have noticed my feelings. That's why she was pressing me for an answer. Recently, Caitlin had stopped treating me as big brother. At first, I thought it was just familial love. "I wanted to live with you forever," thinking it was just a sisterly feeling. But recently, I realized something. The feelings I have for you are different from those I have for my mother or the relatives who raised me. "Ronald, do I have to let go of these feelings?" Hearing something like that, I couldn't help but become conscious of it. But I still had doubts about whether I was truly the right partner for her. Oddly enough, the one who pushed me forward was Caitlin's mother. One day, while Caitlin was at work and I was off, her mother appeared, almost as if she had timed it perfectly. "Are you Ronald, who used to live next door?" "Oh, I see, so much time has passed. You've grown up. If you're living with her, does that mean what I think it does?" She was still like the icy person I remembered. But now there was an air of someone who had let go of something. When I told her that although Caitlin and I were living together, we were still not quite lovers, she was genuinely shocked. At the same time, she said this: "If you keep dragging your feet like this, you'll end up regretting it." I, in the end, couldn't do anything for her. Even on that day, if I hadn't had a seizure, she wouldn't have had to go through such a scary experience. I was the worst kind of mother, relying on the kindness of your family. So, I have no intention of acting like her mother now, but I have to tell you this. If you're going to end up regretting it, then tell her how you feel. Don't turn out like me." With that, she left. An hour later, as if to replace her, Caitlin came home. As soon as she opened the front door, she asked, "Did Mom come by any chance?" She seemed to have guessed from the faint lingering scent of osmanthus. Scent is something that easily sticks in a person's memory. It's called the Proust effect. Caitlin must have remembered her mother's scent unconsciously, something she had known since she was little. "Hey, how long are you going to keep doing that?" Her voice pulled me back to reality. I had been combing the same spot repeatedly, and she, growing impatient, had spoken up. I apologized, stood up, and put the comb back in its place. When I turned around, Caitlin was staring at me with a serious expression. I held my breath. And then, I made up my mind. "Caitlin, I've decided. I won't lie about or hide my feelings any longer. But doing so might ruin the relationship we've built up until now. Are you ready to move forward, knowing that?" Caitlin blinked for a moment, then burst out laughing. After giggling for a bit, she gave me that bright, sun-like smile again and replied, "I'm actually hoping for it to break down. But you know, it doesn't just end when it falls apart. Like building blocks, we can rebuild it. Just in a different shape this time." With those words, I gently pulled her into an embrace. Caitlin had two roles in my life. One was as my little sister. But that was now in the past. From this moment on, Caitlin would be reborn as something else. For the rest of my life, I knew I wouldn't be able to live without her. "You don't have to hide that scar anymore, do you?" "Yeah, from now on, I'll live as myself." And with that, we both laughed together. Leave the woman and get lost. Ryan burst into laughter, but after a moment, his face turned serious, and he shouted loudly. Just then, a child's voice called out, "What are you doing here?" "Master Charles. What are you doing in a place like this?" Ryan exclaimed in surprise. Ignoring Ryan's startled reaction, Charles continued speaking. "Hey, Ryan, you don't even know who this guy is, do you? That's not something the Irving gang would be proud of." "Huh? What do you mean?" "He's just some guy running a small restaurant, isn't he?" Charles sighed dramatically and then, turning to me, politely bowed his head and said, "I'm sorry, sir. Could you introduce yourself to these guys?" Confused but compliant, I decided to do as I was told and introduced myself. "My name is Isaac Turner." "Is that good enough?" The moment I said my name, Ryan's expression visibly changed to one of shock. "Isaac Turner. Impossible. No way." After discovering who I really was, Ryan was about to face a living nightmare. "My name is Isaac Turner, and I'm 56 years old. I run a small traditional restaurant with my wife in the town where I was born and raised. Other than the fact that I've never worked for a company, I'm just an ordinary middle-aged man like any other. When I started working after finishing school, I thought men in their 50s were ancient, but now that I've reached that age, I realize I'm not much different from when I was younger. Of course, I'm sure my body is getting weaker each year, but so far, I haven't noticed any significant decline in my strength or memory. In fact, I think I find life easier now than I did in my youth, thanks to the experience I've gained over the years. I totally get why older folks around the world don't want to be treated like they're past their prime. Many lively men like that stop by my restaurant, Daisy Place, on a whim, sharing their complaints about work or problems at home. And it's usually my wife, Katrina, who listens patiently to their endless chatter. Katrina is over 10 years younger than me, still in her mid-40s. With her refined features, she looks great in the traditional attire of a hostess. Even from my perspective as her husband, Katrina is quite a beauty and has become a bit of an idol among the older men who come to our place. They all adore her, calling out, "Katrina, Katrina," and there are even some customers who come just to see her. I'm always grateful for Katrina, who is not only friendly but also very good at dealing with customers. I have a beautiful wife by my side, my body and mind are healthy, and I get to do the work I love. Is there anything in this world more fortunate than this? As long as this life continues, I don't wish for anything more. Or at least, that's what I thought. Our restaurant, Daisy Place, typically operates from the evening. It's a cozy place with just a counter seating and one private room. We specialize in local alcohol and regional dishes, and most of our customers are office workers stopping by on their way home from work. We deliberately designed the exterior to look uninviting to keep the crowds away, so we rarely get young people or tourists. By the way, the name Daisy Place comes from Daisy, which is Katrina's birth flower. I originally wanted to take Katrina's name, but she felt too embarrassed, so we decided against it. Now, our small restaurant, Daisy Place, has another side to it. On weekends, during the daytime, we run a kids' cafeteria that provides meals for children. These days, kids' cafeterias are often in the news due to issues with local government relations and funding, but thankfully, ours has been running smoothly so far. That's thanks to the support from our local shopping district and neighbors. However, one afternoon, an unexpected incident occurred at our restaurant. It happened while we were serving lunch to some children who had come by. That day, perhaps due to the rain, there were fewer kids than usual, just my wife and me, along with two siblings who come every week. Feeling generous, I decided to treat them, saying, "Today's a special day," and served them ice cream for dessert. The brothers were delighted. Katrina and I smiled as we watched them enjoy themselves. But that cheerful atmosphere quickly disappeared. This is so annoying. I'm totally soaked. This is the worst. A young man, who seemed to be in his 30s, came in, grumbling loudly. He was wearing an expensive-looking suit, but he didn't seem like an office worker at all. With his flashy hair color and casual speech, I initially thought he was a youthfully dressed man. The man carelessly took off his jacket, still dripping with water, and shook it violently, scattering droplets everywhere. The four of us in the shop watched, holding our breath, as this strange man made his entrance. But the youthfully dressed man didn't care about the tense atmosphere at all. He simply sat down at the counter seating and, looking at Katrina, bluntly said, "Beer." It seemed he was just looking to have a quick drink while waiting out the rain. However, I felt sorry for the man, but Daisy Place wasn't a regular restaurant at that moment, and it was operating as a kids' cafeteria. Besides, we needed to start preparing for the evening's business soon. In response to the rude man's demand, Katrina lowered her eyebrows apologetically and replied, "I'm sorry, sir. We only start serving in the evening. We're in the middle of preparations now, so we can't serve alcohol. I apologize for the inconvenience." I don't care if you're preparing. When I say I want a drink, you should just pour it. Besides, it's raining outside. You expect me to run home in this rain? Don't mess with me. The man shouted at Katrina, his voice loud and threatening. He even leaned over the counter, glaring straight into Katrina's face. I could see her slender body tense up with fear under his aggressive behavior. I couldn't allow him to intimidate Katrina like that. I quickly stepped between Katrina and the man. "If you'd like, we can give you one of our umbrellas," No need to return it, so please feel free to take it with you." Hearing my words, Katrina swiftly turned around and headed to the back to fetch an umbrella. I faced the man, deliberately smiling as I did so. The man hesitated for a moment but quickly regained his composure and shouted again, "Are you telling me to leave?" "You're welcome to interpret it that way," I replied with a friendly smile. I must have been pretty angry that he had shouted at Katrina. Without realizing it, I had provoked him even further, and his anger escalated. "You old man! Don't you dare disrespect me! Do you even know who I am? I'm Ryan from the Irving gang. Don't think you can mess with a mafia and get away with it. I'll destroy this place." As he shouted, he stood up forcefully, knocking over his chair with a loud crash that echoed through the shop. At that moment, the younger of the two brothers who had been quietly eating ice cream in the back room started crying. Until then, he had been holding his breath, but the loud noise and the man's shouting had finally overwhelmed him. Ryan, now identified as a mafia instead of a youthfully dressed man, seemed irritated by the child's crying. He clicked his tongue and sneered, "Kids in here, too," as he peered into the back room. I quickly stepped in front of the boys to shield them from the man. Just as Ryan reached out to grab my collar, the shop door opened, and a young man's voice called out, "Boss, it's time." Apparently, Ryan had left his underlings outside the shop. "If we don't leave soon, we'll be late for the meeting with the big boss." Hearing this, Ryan spat out, "You better remember this," and reluctantly turned his back on me and left the shop. For the moment, it seemed the crisis had passed. That day, we decided to close the shop early and took the brothers home just to be safe. And the next day, we went on a trip we had planned for a while. Actually, every year, my wife and I go on a trip together around the time of our wedding anniversary. With our kind of business, it's hard to take a long trip, but we always make sure to manage this one getaway. Our regulars know about it, so they often say things like, "Where are you going this year? Enjoy your time together." I was still worried about Ryan, who had come to the shop during the day, but we decided to go on our trip as planned. After all, it was a rare opportunity for us to enjoy some time together. Little did we know what was about to happen. The trip with Katrina was, to put it mildly, perfect. The hot springs, the inn's meals, and the service exceeded our expectations, and Katrina seemed genuinely pleased. The dishes made with local ingredients were especially delicious, and I felt like I learned something new as a cook. But that happy feeling was shattered the moment we returned home. After unpacking at home, we headed to the shop together, only to find ourselves surrounded by 4 men. And, of course, among them was Ryan. "There you are, old man. You made me wait 3 days. You must be Ryan, if I'm not mistaken? Not bad for an old man." "That's right, I'm Ryan from the Irving," he replied with a smug grin, his mood completely changed from the last time. Honestly, I didn't want to get involved with him, but since he knew where our shop was, I couldn't just dismiss him. I decided to respond as politely as possible, trying not to provoke him. "So, what brings Ryan from the Irving gang to our place?" "You see, when a mafia shows up with his men, it's obvious, isn't it? I'm here to collect. Today, I'm here for the protection money. I'll settle for $10,000 this time, including the trouble you caused me last time. How about it? It's a bargain, right? Protection money is an illegal fee mafia demand from businesses in exchange for supposed protection. Of course, there is no legal obligation for the business to pay it. Such demands for protection money or territory fees are not just something from gangster movies, they still happen in the real world. We've been running our shop here for many years, but I've never heard of the Irving gang asking for protection money. It's probably something Ryan decided to do on his own. I sighed inwardly but continued speaking without changing my demeanor. I'm sorry you came all this way, but we must decline. We don't need any protection, and we've been doing business here for a long time. We have no reason to pay such a fee. Ha? Are you trying to make an enemy of our gang? You've got some nerve. As expected, Ryan's temper flared instantly. But I wasn't about to back down, so I replied calmly. No, that's not my intention. But our shop has never once been asked for such a fee by the Irving gang. Are you sure this is something your gang is officially requesting? Of course it is. Keep pushing your luck, and you'll regret it. With that, Ryan suddenly threw a punch at my face. I quickly dodged, letting his fist glance off my left cheek instead of my nose, then pretended to stagger dramatically. I wasn't hurt because I've always been pretty tough, but Katrina, looking worried, rushed to my side to support me. Maybe I had overdone it a bit with the performance. At that moment, Ryan noticed Katrina standing beside me and gave a sly smile. Actually, I've changed my mind. I'll cut it down to $5,000 out of pity. But in return, I'm taking that woman with me. What? There's no way I would agree to that. She is my wife. Shocked, I reverted to my usual way of speaking. Ryan, ignoring my reaction, continued insensitively. Come on, the woman would prefer us over some old man like you, right? She's a bit older, but she's a beauty. I'll keep her until I get bored. Don't you dare. If you lay a hand on Katrina, I'll send every one of you straight to hell. Ha! Listen to this old man. What do you think you're gonna do to us? Ryan laughed loudly for a moment, then his expression turned serious, and he growled, "Leave the woman and get lost." It seemed unlikely this situation could be resolved peacefully, I thought, when suddenly, from behind, a child's voice said, "What are you doing here?" The unexpected, innocent voice made everyone turn around at once. There stood a boy who looked to be in the upper grades of elementary school. I'm pretty good at remembering faces, but I didn't recognize this kid from the kids' cafeteria or the neighborhood. Katrina also tilted her head in confusion, wondering where he could be from. I thought I needed to get the child out of there quickly, but before I could say anything, the mafia reacted first. Master Charles. Why are you here? Katrina and I exchanged glances, puzzled by the term master. Now that they mentioned it, the boy was dressed quite well. If the mafia was calling him master, then. As I was piecing it together, the boy spoke to Ryan. I told you not to call me that outside the house. Ryan, you never learn. Sorry, master. Charles. So, are you going to answer my question? I asked what you're doing here. It was now clear that this boy, Charles, was somehow connected to the mafia. Judging by how deferential Ryan was being, the kid must be related to someone important. Ryan answered Charles's question with a cheerful tone. What am I doing? Just working, of course. This guy here was resisting, so I was teaching him a lesson. Come on, master, it's dangerous here. So let's go back. I'll have one of my men escort you. Ryan signaled to one of his subordinates to take Charles away, but Charles shook off the man's arm and continued speaking. Hey, Ryan. Did you really mess with this guy without knowing who he is? That's disgraceful, even for the Irving gang. Ha? What do you mean? He's just some old man running a small restaurant, right? Charles let out an exaggerated sigh and then, bowing politely, said to me, "I'm sorry, sir. Could you introduce yourself to these guys?" Not understanding what was going on, I did as I was told and introduced myself. "My name is Isaac Turner." "Is that good enough?" After my awkward introduction, I looked at Charles, confused, and he responded cheerfully, "Yes. Thank you very much." In contrast, the Mafia's reaction was the complete opposite of Charles's. The moment I said my name, they visibly showed signs of distress. "Isaac Turner. That's impossible. No way." As soon as Ryan heard my name, he tried to run away, but Charles stopped him. The other Mafia members were also pale-faced, trembling with fear. Seeing the Mafia so terrified just because I introduced myself was an odd sight, and Katrina looked up at me, eyes wide with surprise, and asked, "Honey, who are you?" "Well, that's..." I felt it was finally time to reveal my past to Katrina, but before I could speak, Charles answered her question in my place. "Sorry to surprise you, ma'am. Of course, Isaac here has nothing to do with the Mafia. He's just a regular person. But he's so strong that he's become a legend in our gang." "A legend? My husband?" "I did hear he was in the self-defense forces when he was younger, but is he really that strong?" Just as Katrina said, I was in the self-defense forces until I was in my 30s. I started the small restaurant after leaving the forces and marrying Katrina. But just being a former soldier wouldn't make Mafia so cautious. I was actually in a special forces unit. With no close family, having lost my parents at a young age, I was recruited by a certain special unit and remained there until I retired. I could easily neutralize 4 Mafia barehanded in an instant. However, I had never told Katrina about the special forces. That information was classified, even from family. I had always been careful to keep this secret, but the Mafia has its ways of gathering information. It seemed the Irving gang had somehow discovered I was former special forces. Just as I prepared myself for the consequences, Charles said something unexpected. "Well, of course, ma'am. There aren't many people who can take down a bear with their bare hands." "A bear with his bare hands? Oh, you didn't know?" "Oops, should I not have said that?" Charles covered his mouth quickly, looking up at me with a worried expression. For someone who speaks so maturely, he could still show a childlike expression at times. I patted Charles gently on the head and said with a wry smile, "No, it's fine. It's my fault for keeping it a secret." I didn't want to worry Katrina. But it seems the Irving gang found out anyway. Charles looked relieved and said, "Oh, that's good," before continuing with his explanation. "It wasn't really the R gang, but rather my grandfather, the boss. He got the information on his own. Since then, his favorite phrase has been, 'Don't mess with Isaac Turner.' The younger members even call you Isaac the Bear Slayer and are terrified of him. Many of our members come from areas plagued by wild animals, so they understand the terror of bears. Someone who could take down a bear with his bare hands is naturally someone they respect." "I see." Charles, the grandson of the boss, was exaggerating, but there was some truth to his story. A few years ago, while hunting in the mountains with a hunter friend, I had a run-in with a bear and ended up fighting it. In the end, the bear was shot dead with a hunting rifle, so I didn't actually kill it with my bare hands, but the story spread that way. Not wanting to draw attention, I'd asked the hunter to keep quiet, but somehow the information leaked. And a local reporter even requested an interview. Of course, I declined, but it seems that reporter's story got to the Irving gang. I was relieved to know that it wasn't my special forces background that had been exposed. Once Charles finished explaining, he turned back to the now visibly frightened Ryan and his men. "Ryan, you lied to me. There's no way the boss would order an attack on Isaac's shop. And I saw you punch Isaac, who didn't even resist. Please, master, just don't tell the boss." "I swear I didn't know. I never imagined Isaac Turner would be in a place like this." Ryan dropped to his knees and bowed his head to the ground. The other mafia members had also quietly sat down on the ground, kneeling. It seemed the real issue wasn't so much my presence, but rather that they had gone against the boss's orders. Apparently, they were very afraid of the boss. However, Charles continued speaking mercilessly. "It's not just about today, is it? I also know what you did 3 days ago, Ryan. You barged into the shop outside of business hours and threatened the lady and the kids who were there, didn't you? How do you know about that?" Ryan, too shocked to come up with an excuse, blurted out. "Indeed, how does Charles know about it?" As I was wondering, Charles quickly provided an answer. "You see the kid in the shop that day. He's a friend from my class. One of the few who doesn't avoid me even though they know I'm the son of a mafia. What, that kid is Master's friend. He has to look after his little brother, so we can't hang out much, but he told me everything. He said he was too scared to come back to the shop because of some guy named Ryan from the Irving gang. Apparently, the older of the two brothers who came to the kids' cafeteria was a friend of Charles's." Ryan looked utterly despondent, lost for words. He seemed to have no strength left to even make excuses. Charles glanced down at the stunned Ryan with a look of contempt and calmly issued an order to someone. "Get them out of here. They're disturbing the shop." Out of nowhere, several men in black suits appeared and began dragging away the 4 underlings one by one. Ryan snapped out of his stupor and tried to resist, but they hauled him away without a word. One of the men in black pulled out a package from his pocket and offered it to me, saying it was for medical expenses. But there was no way I would accept anything from the mafia. Besides, I had deliberately taken the hit to avoid provoking Ryan further, even though I could have dodged it. I didn't need compensation for an injury I chose to sustain myself. I declined the offer from the man in black and called out to Charles, who was getting into a car. "Hey, could you tell those brothers that there's no need to be scared anymore? They're welcome to come back to the shop anytime." "Got it. I'll let them know at school. And if you'd like, you're welcome to come too, Charles. You're always invited." Charles's eyes widened in surprise, and he hesitated, looking troubled. "But..." Seeing Charles's troubled expression, Katrina gently spoke to him. "Don't worry about it. The kids' cafeteria is open to any child. I'm sure those brothers would be happy if you come too." Charles's expression softened a bit at Katrina's words, but he didn't say he would come. Instead, he quietly bowed to us and walked away. He was likely concerned about his connection to the mafia. Sometime later, a certain person visited Daisy Place in a disguise. It was Charles's grandfather, Henry, the boss of the Irving gang. In fact, Henry had occasionally visited our shop alone, even before the recent incident. Of course, Henry never openly identified himself as a mafia, and I never brought up his line of work. Incidentally, my wife Katrina had no idea about Henry's true identity and casually called him Harry. Charles had said I was unrelated to the Irving gang, but in reality, it wasn't entirely true. Henry and I first met when we were in elementary school. I had no family and was raised by distant relatives, but the home environment was far from ideal, and I was always hungry. A couple who ran a local diner felt sorry for me and would sometimes give me free meals. There were a few other kids who came for free food, and one of them was Henry. To clarify, Henry and I were never really friends. Whenever our eyes met, we would start brawling, and even when we ended up at the diner together, we wouldn't exchange a word. But back then, Henry was the only one I couldn't beat in a fight, so I respected his strength. Apparently, Henry also acknowledged my skills. I left the town to pursue further studies, while Henry stayed and became a mafia. For many years, we neither saw nor thought of each other, but it seems Henry had kept me in mind. He started coming to my shop after the whole bear incident. He usually just chatted with Katrina and never spoke directly to me, but after the recent incident, he came by and muttered a quiet apology. "I'm sorry." Then, he bought the most expensive alcohol and offered it to all the customers in the shop. In return, I silently served him a dish I knew he liked. And just like that, the matter was settled between us. There was no need for conversation. Even though the incident was resolved, it had caused quite a stir in front of the shop, and rumors spread throughout the neighborhood. There were plenty of exaggerated stories, but after filtering through the information, it became clear that Ryan had been punished within the gang. The specifics are unclear to regular folks, but according to those who spotted Ryan in another town, he was seen walking with a noticeable limp. It's almost certain that this was a result of some form of punishment. Whether it's a temporary injury or a lifelong one, it's clear that Ryan lost his standing within the Irving gang. Naturally, he never showed up at our shop again, and there have been no sightings of him in the neighborhood either. Katrina and I continue to live our peaceful life, just as we did before the incident. The only change is that Charles has started coming to the kids' cafeteria. At first, he seemed to feel awkward about using the kids' cafeteria despite not needing it and being associated with his family's business. But after some encouragement from his grandfather, he began coming gladly. However, at Charles's suggestion, we decided to accept a small amount of money from the children. Of course, we don't ask for an amount the kids can't afford, and in fact, we don't set a specific amount at all. Some kids drop in $1, 50 cents, or even 10 cents in the box and leave. If they can't afford it, they don't have to pay, and they can pay what they want whenever they are able. The box is placed where it can't be seen from outside, so no one knows how much each child contributes or if they contribute at all. This was done out of consideration for children from families like the brothers who truly need the kids' cafeteria. Incidentally, we have had some trouble with Charles trying to slip large bills into the box when we aren't looking. Recently, we added a new rule with a maximum limit of $5 to prevent this. It's often heard that children of the mafia face bullying at school, and Charles was no exception. Despite having done nothing wrong himself, he was avoided and talked about behind his back. However, thanks to the kids' cafeteria, he's made more friends besides those brothers, and Charles has started to show a more childlike side. Katrina always smiles warmly as she watches the lively children. Seeing her like that fills me with happiness every day. Wow, you really outdid yourself. I'm glad I entrusted this to you. However, if you could just go the extra mile and give this presentation in Spanish for our international clients, it would be perfect, don't you think? Mitchell, the department head, had just forced the new female employee to give a presentation. And now he was pushing her to present in Spanish as well. What? There's no way I can suddenly give a presentation in Spanish. Huh? I told you there would be international executives attending today, didn't I? It's common sense to be prepared for that. But that's impossible. The new employee, completely unprepared, was pale and on the verge of tears after being told to present in Spanish. I couldn't stand watching this any longer. Mitchell, let me handle the Spanish presentation. Ha! You, the incompetent one? Mitchell scoffed, daring me to try, but as I began speaking, the color drained from his face. Now, it's time to get back at him for everything he's done. I work for one of the largest auto parts suppliers in the US. Until recently, I was stationed at a regional office, but now I'd been transferred to the first sales division at headquarters, the company's prized team. There were 5 of us who were newly assigned to the division, including the well-known beauty, Ivy. On our first day, Mitchell, the head of the division, gave us a greeting. Welcome, new employees. This first sales division is the elite core of the company. Our job is to promote our top products both domestically and internationally and expand our markets. We're talking deals worth millions to tens of millions of dollars. A mistake can cost you everything, so you'd better stay sharp. It's all about sales. First, second, and from 3rd to 10th, it's still sales. Just increase the numbers. Got it? Mitchell yelled in an intimidating tone, slowly scanning each of the newcomers' faces. When he got to me, he sneered in disdain. Well, I never thought I'd see you again. Managed to claw your way back from that regional office, huh? Though, I wouldn't be surprised if you had to go back again. Just don't cause too much trouble until then, all right? Mitchell was openly mocking me. The other new employees seemed to get the impression that I must have made some kind of mistake in the past. Mitchell and I used to work together in the PR department at headquarters. Back when I joined the company, I was full of enthusiasm, eager to land as many deals as possible by working harder than anyone else. Mitchell didn't like my ambition and constantly gave me a hard time, pushing impossible tasks on me whenever he could. He has a habit of relentlessly bullying employees he doesn't like. It was because of Mitchell's harassment that I was transferred from headquarters to a regional office. This situation was clearly a continuation of that. As expected, Mitchell kept comparing me to the other new employees, throwing passive-aggressive remarks my way. He especially liked to compare me to Ivy, constantly praising her achievements. Ivy, you're really something. Graduated from Harvard, great at your job, and beautiful, too. They say no one gets everything in life. But you seem to have it all. Makes me proud. Keep up the good work. Oh no, it's all thanks to your guidance, Mitchell, and the senior staff's support. Well, and then there's Mark. What are you even doing? Maybe you should try to learn something from Ivy. Sure. Your sales numbers in the sticks were okay, but that was probably just luck, right? Not that I have high hopes for you. But at least don't drag me down, got it? If you screw up again, I'll make sure you get transferred even further away. Yes, sir. I'll keep that in mind. Keep that in mind? Don't just give me lip service. If you really understood, your sales would be double what they are now. Are you even taking this seriously? Get it together. The truth is, my numbers weren't bad at all, and I had already exceeded my targets. But Mitchell chose to ignore that. Some of the other new employees seemed to start noticing the oddity of me being criticized despite my good performance. Mark, you're hitting your targets, so why is Mitchell being so harsh? Mitchell is the kind of guy who likes to tear down employees he doesn't like. That's just who he is. Meanwhile, Ivy, the star new employee, was steadily increasing her sales, thanks not only to her talent but also to her attractive appearance. Many of the clients we dealt with were male executives, and having someone as beautiful and capable as Ivy in sales often led to favorable responses. Of course, business is all about skills and results, but I couldn't help feeling that her looks were working in her favor in some cases. Still, I worried that her success might draw unnecessary attention or trouble. Ivy, you're amazing. You're talented and beautiful. Mark, please stop bringing up my looks. Do you think I've gotten this far without putting in any effort? I've worked twice as hard to make sure people don't just see me for my appearance. Sorry, that was thoughtless of me. Her sharp tongue didn't stop, clearly triggered by my careless words. And why are you even in the first sales division, Mark? This team is made up of top sales talent. I heard you doubled sales at your regional office. But is that true? Honestly, from the way you act here, I don't see you putting in any effort. There are plenty of people fighting for a spot in this division. If you're not going to try, stop wasting a valuable position. Oh, sorry. You always look so relaxed and unbothered. If you're not serious about this, why don't you just ask HR for a transfer? She had probably been judged as just a pretty face by others for much of her life. But knowing that, she never gave up and continued to work hard. It was only natural that someone like her would become the top performer in the sales division. Mitchell took even more of a liking to Ivy. Ivy, we've got dinner with the department head of the client later, so you're coming with me. Yes, I'd be happy to join you. This started happening more frequently, with Ivy being roped into client dinners. She didn't realize that Mitchell was using her as nothing more than eye candy for these meetings. Ivy, the company doesn't encourage attending client dinners outside of work hours, right? Even if it's with Mitchell, I wouldn't recommend doing it too often. Honestly, you should keep some distance from him. Is that jealousy talking? And you seem like the type who doesn't value casual settings. Right now is when I need to push myself. I'm aiming higher. Don't lump me in with someone as unmotivated as you. My advice fell on deaf ears. Then one day, Mitchell selected Ivy to lead the presentation for a major project. Ivy, I'm sure you can handle it. This is a huge project for the company's future, and it's an honor for a newcomer like you to be chosen. Yes. I'll do my best. This project involved marketing the company's newly developed EV control system to both domestic and international markets. Not only the sales department but also the PR and development teams were involved in the massive promotional campaign. But honestly, assigning such an important presentation to a new employee was a reckless move. Some voices from the PR department raised concerns as well. It felt like the company was using the attractive Ivy as a poster girl because of her elite background. Some employees even started gossiping about Mitchell's relationship with Ivy, speculating that there might be more to it. Whether good or bad, it was definitely a hot topic. However, with the project being a new product launch, there was an overwhelming amount of data to compile, including cost-effectiveness comparisons with the previous control system and competitor analysis. It was far too much for one person to handle. Of course, the development and manufacturing teams were helping out, but even so, it was too much for Ivy alone. And on top of that, I knew she was being dragged out for drinks with Mitchell almost every night. She was working overtime daily and barely getting any sleep, her face becoming paler and more exhausted. The dark circles under her eyes were unmistakable, and her appearance was suffering as a result. Ivy, can I help with anything? There must be something I can do to lighten the load. When I offered to help, Seeing her desperately compiling documents in the conference room, she glared at me as if insulted that I, of all people, was offering her pity. "I'm fine. I don't need any help from you, Mark. I can handle this on my own." Still, I knew things would only get worse if she didn't get some help, so I pressed on. "Okay, but if you push yourself too hard and collapse, you won't be able to do the presentation at all. I can help with organizing the data or any background tasks. Just let me do something to help." After thinking it over, she seemed to realize the practical benefits of accepting my offer. "All right, if you insist. Could you put together a comparison chart for the competitors' products?" "Sure, no problem." From that point, I started helping Ivy with the presentation materials. As I worked alongside her, it became even clearer how overwhelming the workload was. I couldn't shake the feeling that Mitchell had some ulterior motive in play here. "Here you go, Ivy. How's this?" I handed the document I had finished making to Ivy. "What? It's done already? This is amazing. It's so well organized and easy to understand." "Mark, who are you, really?" "Me? I'm just an ordinary employee. I'm glad it helped, though. But seriously, this workload is insane. If you had tried to do it all alone, you would have broken down. It's fine if you don't mention my help, but please let me keep lending a hand." "What? Are you sure?" "Of course. Thank you." To be honest, I wasn't sure how I was going to get through all this on my own. There was no way I could let all her hard work go to waste. I wouldn't let Mitchell get what he wanted. I did everything I could to reduce Ivy's burden. Thanks to that, we managed to finish the presentation materials the day before the big meeting. "Mark, thank you. If you hadn't helped, there's no way I could have gotten this far." No, it's all thanks to your hard work, Ivy. Now all that's left is to nail the presentation. Let's do this." And so, we headed into the presentation for the new product that would determine the company's future. The room was packed with key executives from major car manufacturers. And even international executives were attending virtually. Ivy's presentation was smooth and on point. With her radiant smile and professional demeanor, the audience was attentive and in good spirits throughout. It was clear that her presentation was being very well received. After she finished, Mitchell stood beside her and said, "Ivy, as expected, you nailed it. I knew I could count on you." "Thank you." "It's all thanks to your recommendation, Mitchell." Just as we were about to move on to the Q&A session, Mitchell dropped a bombshell. "But you know, since we've got so many international clients today, if you could push it just a bit further, it would be absolutely perfect." "What do you mean?" "Well, for example, if you could seamlessly switch to Spanish and finish the presentation in style." "What? Come on, you're talented. That should be easy for you." "But I can't. I wasn't prepared for this. There's no way I can suddenly present in Spanish without any preparation." "What do you mean, suddenly?" "I told you there was a possibility you'd need to do it in Spanish, didn't I?" "No, you just told me I'd be giving a presentation. You never said anything about doing it in Spanish. Are you making excuses now?" "I told you international executives would be attending today. Preparing for that should have been common sense." "But when she was originally assigned the presentation, it was only to deliver it in English. She could probably manage a few greetings in Spanish, But giving a detailed presentation with technical terms? That was impossible. Yet Mitchell continued to back her into a corner. What? You can't do it? You graduated from Harvard, didn't you? If you can't even manage this, you'll tank not just the presentation, but the entire deal. But trying to present in broken Spanish would be even worse. Don't talk back. When you're told to do something, you do it. I couldn't stand watching Ivy turn pale and crumble under the pressure any longer. Mitchell, let me handle the presentation in Spanish. What? You? There's no way you can pull off a presentation in Spanish. You won't know unless I try, right? Don't make the same mistake as last time, Mark. If you mess up again, I'll make sure you're transferred even further away. I'm prepared for that. I stepped in front of Ivy and began the presentation in fluent Spanish. I started with a greeting, thanking the executives for allowing me to introduce our new product. Then I walked them through the product's development process and highlighted its strengths. Finally, I outlined the benefits of using the product and how it would enhance profitability, even throwing in some specific numbers. As I spoke effortlessly, the overseas executives started nodding and commenting, "Excellent" and "Amazing." But I didn't stop there. I continued by presenting in Hindi for the Indian executives and in Mandarin for the Chinese executives. Mitchell stared at me in shock, mouth agape, as I seamlessly switched between languages. Just like before, the room erupted in applause, and I concluded the multilingual presentation without a hitch. Not only did the presentation go smoothly, but we successfully secured contracts with several major companies. In fact, many of the clients specifically requested that I be their point of contact moving forward. A few hours later, we were called to the CEO's office, where Mr. Nash personally praised us for the success. Of course, Mitchell was there too. Unaware of the full story, Mr. Nash complimented Mitchell as well, attributing the success to his leadership. Mitchell, as smug as ever, proudly took credit for it all, basking in the praise. As soon as Mitchell left the CEO's office, he muttered to himself with satisfaction, "Well, this seals my promotion." Then he turned to us and said, "Don't let today's success go to your head." From my perspective, that presentation was just a cheap trick. You wouldn't have gotten praise from Mr. Nash if I wasn't your boss. Remember, from now on, you need to be ready to handle any request that comes your way. And with that, he walked off. What a guy! As I stood there, baffled, Ivy turned to me and bowed her head. "Mark, thank you so much. If you hadn't stepped in back there, we wouldn't have secured the contracts. And who knows what could have happened to the company's reputation. Just thinking about it still makes me shake. But how is it that you can speak not just Spanish, but also Hindi and Chinese fluently? Who are you, really?" Well, back when I was a new employee, Mitchell did the same thing to me. During my first presentation, he suddenly told me to give a speech in Spanish. I panicked, and my broken Spanish led to a disaster. We barely managed to secure the deal, but Mitchell blamed it all on me for being unprepared. And I got shipped off to a regional office. Back then, I had graduated from a top-tier university and was expected to be on the fast track to success. I worked tirelessly to meet those expectations. But that's when I caught Mitchell's attention. He worked me to the bone, barely letting me sleep. The results I gave were considered Mitchell's, and ultimately I was sent to a regional office for a single presentation error. Later, I learned that this was how Mitchell operated, and I can't tell you how much it infuriated me. When I first arrived at the regional office, I was completely disheartened. but I couldn't get Mitchell's smug face out of my head. I realized I couldn't let it end like that, so I started studying languages. I see. The regional office was located near a U.S. military base and a large auto manufacturing plant, so it was a melting pot of different cultures. A businessman working with the base offered to teach me Spanish at a low cost, and the pub I frequented was full of people from China and India, who were more than happy to teach me their languages in exchange for a few drinks. Among them was Rudra, who, when I was first sent to the regional office and feeling down, was the one who really listened to me. We'd drink together, and I'd vent my frustrations. There were nights when I'd cry after a call from my family, who were worried about me. Even at my lowest, Rudra never showed any sign of annoyance and always stuck by my side, encouraging me. Mark, life has its ups and downs. When things are bad, just drink. I'll listen to all your complaints. We clicked immediately and shared many conversations. As he taught me Hindi, we bonded over barbecues and road trips, becoming close friends. Mark, you're a great guy. I used to think Americans were shallow, but you're honest and trustworthy. Rudra, you're so kind and easy to be around, and I love your sense of humor about money. Yes. Indians love money. But we love having fun even more. American barbecue is the best. He especially loved American barbecues, which lined up perfectly with my hobbies. I told him I'd love to visit India one day to have an Indian-style barbecue and go on a road trip to see the vast landscapes. And he promised to show me around when the time came. We spent as much time together as we could. And honestly, learning from native speakers turned out to be way more effective than any language class. That's how I was able to pick up Hindi, which is said to be tough for Americans, in no time. Thanks to all that, I'm now fluent in Spanish, Hindi, and Chinese. I'm thinking about tackling French and Arabic next. That's incredible. But why did you keep it hidden for so long? Because Mitchell was up to something. He's the type to crush any talented newcomers who might threaten his position. I was one of his victims. And I heard that other new employees got the same treatment after I was sent to the regional office. So, I was this close to being crushed too, huh? Pretty much. That's why I kept my skills under wraps, just in case he tried something. It's better to be prepared, right? Wow. I had no idea. I've been so arrogant and rude to you, Mark. I'm really sorry. I was the one who didn't understand. Ivy sincerely apologized for how she treated me. But I can't forgive Mitchell for what he's doing. Taking all the credit for his team's hard work and pushing them beyond their limits. Destroying their futures in the process. It's unacceptable. You're right. There's actually a reason I was transferred to this department. What? Wait, you don't mean? If there's anything I can do to help, I'll do whatever it takes. I confided in Ivy, telling her a secret. A few days later, on the day of our regular meeting with one of our major clients, the client's CEO, who happened to be visiting the US, was scheduled to attend. Mitchell, who had been tasked with delivering the sales report, stood nervously before the executives. Just as he was about to begin, I stepped forward with determination. Before Mitchell delivers his sales report, I have something important to share with everyone. As I spoke, I projected some documents onto the screen. There was a brief murmur in the room, but I remained calm and began addressing the international executives in Spanish, Hindi, and Chinese, exposing Mitchell's fraudulent activities. On the screen was clear evidence of payments funneled through a fake account from subcontractors. with the money ultimately landing in Mitchell's personal account. Additionally, a video played showing a secret deal Mitchell had made with a certain company at an exclusive members-only club. Mitchell had been forcing the subcontracted parts factory to lower their prices while keeping the invoice amounts unchanged, pocketing the difference. He then used that money to fund excessive client entertainment and secret deals. There were even traces of him illegally funneling company property. Stop. Mark, what proof do you have to back up these lies? They're not lies. All this evidence is real. In truth, my actual position was within the CEO's direct audit department. My skills at the regional office, along with my history of working under Mitchell, had caught Mr. Nash's attention, and he had tasked me with investigating Mitchell's activities. Suspicion had already reached Mr. Nash, who'd heard rumors about Mitchell's shady dealings. The reason the investigation went so smoothly was thanks to the audit department's support. Mitchell's face turned pale, beads of cold sweat forming on his forehead. Don't listen to this low-level employee. Everything he's saying is just a bluff. I swear, I haven't done anything wrong. No matter what excuses he tried to come up with, it was too late for Mitchell, though he didn't seem to realize it yet. Then, the CEO of the client company, seated in the middle of the room, finally spoke up. Mark would never lie. I believe his testimony. Mitchell is the one at fault here. What? You're. Sitting on the chair of the client's CEOs was none other than someone I knew well. It was Rudra, the same Rudra who had taught me Hindi. I've heard about Mitchell's reputation. He's known for trapping new employees and sending them off to regional offices. I don't trust him. So our company will not be dealing with Mitchell, but Mr. Nash, what will your company do? Yes, we'll conduct a thorough investigation and take appropriate action against Mitchell. Please rest assured. I see. In that case, I hope you'll assign someone more suitable going forward. Absolutely. Consider it done. With Mr. Nash's response, Mitchell slumped, his face a picture of defeat, and left the room as if it were the end of the world. I hadn't known Rudra was the CEO of a major car manufacturer, but looking back, he probably already knew who I was. I remember how, during our drinking sessions, he'd listened intently to my rants about Mitchell, asking more questions than most people would care to hear. After the meeting was over, Rudra gave a cool thumbs up to me. I sneakily responded by giving a thumbs up to Rudra, too. We both left the place with a smile on our faces. Later, I submitted all the evidence to the audit department, and after a thorough investigation into the fraudulent claims, Mitchell's crimes were fully exposed. Mitchell had threatened the factory manager, saying he'd reduce their orders unless they lowered their prices. The manager, feeling he had no choice, complied and participated in the fraudulent claims. Upon learning the full extent of Mitchell's actions, Mr. Nash demoted him and placed him on disciplinary leave. Mitchell, when questioned, admitted he was afraid of up-and-coming employees threatening his position. That's why he sabotaged promising rookies before they could become a threat. Mitchell, why would you do this? Ha! You future stars wouldn't understand my anxiety. To maintain my position as department head, I needed results. So I thought I could make some extra money from that factory. Doesn't that feel empty? After you sent me off, I worked hard and made my way back here. But what about you? All you did was crush talented new employees without putting in any real effort. What do you have to show for it now? He went silent. I'm going to climb higher, but I'll do it through my own hard work. Cheating like you won't leave anything behind for me. And you know that, don't you? Mitchell, biting his lip in frustration, left the company for good. Soon after, Rudra's company specifically requested that I be assigned as their point of contact. Of course, Rudra and I remain equals and good friends to this day. Recognizing my role in exposing Mitchell's fraud, I was officially promoted to the position of sales department head. Mark, congratulations on your promotion. I'm truly inspired by your hard work. Please continue to guide me. I'll follow you wherever you go. Ivy, full of respect, worked diligently to improve her sales performance and language skills. She follows me around, wanting to learn about my sales attitude. Before long, she started spending so much time working alongside me that she began staying at my place instead of going home. Eventually, we started dating, and today, she's become my wonderful wife. I used to think being sent to the regional office was a major detour in my life, but that wasn't the case at all. That transfer was something I needed in order to succeed. Every challenge, even setbacks, is just another step on the path to success. There are no shortcuts to achieving your goals. Success is best achieved by putting in steady, consistent effort every day. There's no need to rush. I'll continue walking through life, one step at a time, staying true to myself with each step forward. Was this done by an animal or a drunken guest? The trees in the courtyard of the long-established inn looked utterly wrecked. Oh, what should we do? Samantha, the proprietress, murmured in a trembling voice. In just a few hours, a TV crew would arrive for an interview in the courtyard. There was no time to call a gardener. Nor could the staff repair the damage themselves. Watching Samantha, utterly at a loss, I found myself speaking up. Maybe I could do something about this. Samantha's eyes widened at my suggestion. My name is Jake. I'm 30 years old. I'm currently unemployed. At a turning point in my life, I decided to escape reality and came to this inn for a retreat. It's not my body that needs healing, it's my heart. The inn where I'm staying, the Willow Inn, is a place with history. Its exterior is old, well, let's call it charmingly traditional. It's not that they're neglecting it, rather they've maintained it lovingly over generations, giving it a warm, welcoming character. And on top of that, oh, are you heading to the bath? I spun around at the sound of a light, pleasant voice, and saw a woman smiling, dressed in a subdued green kimono. The proprietress of the Willow Inn is this beautiful woman, Samantha. Her black hair was styled in an elegant updo to complement her kimono, and her almond-shaped, double-lidded eyes gave her a sharp, refined look. With her upright posture and dignified presence, she had an aura of solitude that would keep others at a respectful distance, but I'm so glad you're enjoying our baths. But please don't overdo it. Make sure to stay hydrated, too. Oh, here, take this. I got it from the vending machine but accidentally hit the button twice, so I ended up with 2 bottles, she said, scrunching her beautiful face in an endearing way as she offered me one of the bottles. There's a warmth to her, a hint of a free-spirited charm. Oh, no. I couldn't possibly. Here, let me pay you. I stammered, reaching for my change purse, but Samantha firmly pressed the bottle into my hands. Then she leaned close and whispered, "You're staying 3 nights, right? Consider it a small thank you," and with a bright smile, she told me to relax and enjoy before walking away. She is, without a doubt, my ideal type. But when I look in the bathroom mirror, I let out a sigh. With this skinny frame and baby face, there's no way she'd ever be interested in me. The spark of romance that had sprung up in me was quickly snuffed out by the sight of my own reflection. Before any old, painful memories could surface, I shook them off. Alright, time for a bath. In the empty changing room, I stripped off my clothes and underwear, rinsed off, and eased myself into the open-air bath. Ah, this is just what I needed. The view from the bath, with its stones meticulously laid, overlooked a wide, green mountain range. Against the blue sky, the mountains looked breathtaking. Nearby, a neatly trimmed hedge added to the soothing atmosphere. Occasionally, I'd spot a leaf floating in the bath, a small charm in itself. I picked up one of the floating leaves and stared at it. For now, it was vibrant green, but having been separated from its branch, it would soon turn brown and wither away. Just one single leaf. At some point, cut off from where it once grew, it would inevitably fade and die. Is my heart going to wither like this too? I muttered softly, sinking deeper into the water. Dinner was a masterpiece. With fresh seafood, local produce, and every dish crafted with care, I felt truly content. After ordering alcohol, thinking I'd have just one glass, I was stunned when Samantha herself brought it over. With graceful hands, she poured the first glass from a ceramic carafe into a small cup, smiling softly before stepping away. Her movements, the way she handled her kimono, were flawless, yet. Oh! As I watched her beautiful figure retreat, Samantha stumbled slightly. Then she glanced back at me and stuck her tongue out playfully. I wished she'd decide to either be beautiful or be adorable. Her gestures kept my heart in constant turmoil. I gulped down the rest of my alcohol in one swift motion. With a light buzz from the alcohol, I returned to my room, and before I knew it, I'd dozed off. When I came to, it was the middle of the night. It was too early for the hot springs to be open. I closed my eyes, intending to fall back asleep, but I just couldn't drift off. I tossed and turned several times, rolling around restlessly. Finally, I decided to get up. I'd planned on another lazy day around the inn, so if I got tired, I could just nap later. I'd wait until the baths opened at 5 and watch the sunrise from the hot spring. With that plan in mind, I left my room. No one else was there. Wow, all to myself again? I muttered cheerfully, sinking into the open-air bath. Soon, the sun began to rise in the east. How long had it been since I last saw a sunrise? Maybe I'd never seen one up close like this before. With those thoughts floating in my mind, I felt as though the sun's overwhelming power had infused me with strength. Feeling refreshed by the sunrise, I climbed out of the bath and headed to the lobby, thinking I might read the newspaper. Just then, a scream pierced the air. I turned to see Samantha's back in the distance. I rushed over to her, asking, "Is everything all right?" Following her trembling gaze, I looked out to sea. There was a courtyard. It was an area clearly tended to with great care by the inn staff. Yet, the beautiful view I'd seen just hours ago was now entirely transformed. Leaves were scattered everywhere, and some branches were broken. Whether it was the work of an animal or a drunk guest, we didn't know. But for a lobby that welcomes guests, it was an unsightly disaster. "Oh, what should we do?" Samantha's voice quivered as she murmured. I couldn't stop myself from speaking up. "If it's just this much." I could gather the leaves, trim the branches where they're broken. But Samantha shook her head, biting her lip as I rambled on. "No, today, this morning, the local TV crew was scheduled to come. A celebrity was supposed to be in the courtyard, enjoying some handmade sweets. Even if we start now, we won't make it in time." Her voice grew more tearful, and seeing her like that made my chest ache. Without thinking, I blurted out, Do you have pruning shears? Any old tools left behind by the gardeners?" Samantha's eyes widened in surprise. "Yes, we do." She looked at me, bewildered, as I smiled back at her. "Actually, I used to be a gardener. My grandfather and father were the ones who used to look after this inn's garden." Samantha's eyes went wide as she exclaimed, "What? We can talk details later. Could you bring me the tools?" "I promise, I'll take care of this." There was no time to waste. I was eager to get started. But Samantha paused, looking me up and down from head to toe, taking her time to really study me. I felt the urge to click my tongue. "Sure. I might look young, scrawny, and untrustworthy, but Can't you just let me handle this? On the verge of tears, I pleaded with her, and Samantha suddenly seemed taken aback. Oh. No, it's not that, it's just. I can't ask a guest to do work for us. Wait, that's the issue? Completely misunderstanding her hesitation, I found myself looking straight into Samantha's resolute gaze. My deepest apologies, but may I ask for your help? With that, she bent at a perfect 90-degree angle, bowing gracefully. Despite feeling a bit flustered, I managed to respond. I'll do everything I can with the skills I have. At my words, Samantha dashed off to retrieve the tools. While waiting, I took a moment to gaze at the courtyard. Grandpa. Dad, keep an eye on me. I murmured quietly, looking at the garden. Just then, Samantha returned, practically sprinting. And she tripped on a small step in front of me. Watch out. I instinctively lunged forward and caught her. The wooden box she was carrying didn't fall, so everything was safe. Feeling the soft warmth of her in my arms, my heart pounded unexpectedly. Please be careful. If you tripped while holding a box full of sharp tools, who knows what could happen? I scolded her, hoping it would hide my reaction to the closeness. Samantha looked a little downcast. Oh. I'm really sorry. I'm such a klutz. Her sharp, almond eyes drooped, looking forlorn. I realized I'd been too harsh. I'm sorry, I was just relieved you're not hurt. With that, I took the box from her. The corner of the wooden box bore a familiar stamp, Smith. It was the mark my family, the Smith family, had passed down through generations. Opening the lid, I found pruning shears, whetstones, and various other tools neatly arranged. When my father completed his final job at this inn, he specially crafted these tools as a gift for them. He wanted the inn to use these tools to preserve the beauty of the courtyard. Taking out the tools steeped in memories, I started by preparing them. Time was tight, but the sharpness of the tools was essential. I gripped the freshly sharpened pruning shears in my hand. Bringing the blades to the tree that had been a beautifully rounded shape just yesterday, I made the first cut. With a satisfying snip, a branch fell away. For just a moment, I closed my eyes, savoring the familiar feel of the cut. Then, I turned my full focus to restoring the garden. I checked the shape of each tree from multiple angles, trimming the branches with care. I gathered the scattered leaves and broken branches, raked the gravel into a neat, even surface. Though the trees looked slightly smaller now, they were certainly an improvement over the devastation from this morning. After a thorough check, I turned to report back to Samantha, only to be startled. She was standing right behind me. Amazing. She covered her mouth, whispering just that one word. And that alone filled me with satisfaction. Amazing. It's incredible. The courtyard looks nothing like it did this morning. No, it's even more beautiful than yesterday. You truly are a pro. Watching her almost dance with joy, I couldn't help but find her utterly charming. Well, I'm an ex-pro, but, still. I took a small breath. Thank you for trusting me with this. With a refreshed spirit, I bowed to Samantha. My heart felt clear and light. Though a touch of reluctance lingered, I handed her the wooden box of tools. Please, continue taking good care of these tools. I smiled as I spoke and then made my way out of the lobby. Just then, Samantha called after me, sounding flustered. Oh. Wait, I want to thank you. I turned around, grinning broadly. No need. I've already received more than enough. Samantha stood there with a puzzled expression, her mouth slightly open. I couldn't blame her. But I didn't feel the need to explain further. With the rare sense of peace I felt in my heart, I headed back to my room with a light step. I briefly considered heading home early rather than staying for the last 2 nights. Part of me wanted to act on this renewed sense of motivation, but another part wanted to relax a little longer. After some thought, I decided to stay one more night and took a peek at the TV interview from the hallway overlooking the courtyard. In the garden I just restored, Samantha and a familiar local TV personality were chatting and laughing, surrounded by two cameras. In Samantha's hands was a small treat of sweets. The same kind I'd been offered while waiting to check in. They were small but delicious. It must have been one of the inn's specialties. I hoped the inn would get some well-deserved popularity, and after soaking in the sight of the two beautiful women, I returned to my room to relax. Since I'd been up in the middle of the night, sleepiness crept in again. Without fighting it, I let myself doze off, unsure of how much time had passed. The sound of a gentle knock on my door woke me up. Half awake, I answered, and Samantha's voice came from the other side. "Could I have a moment of your time?" So I immediately shot up. It had only been a nap, but did I have bedhead, or worse, some sleep crust in my eyes? Noticing my clothes were a bit disheveled, I hurried to fix them. "Please, come in." My voice came out slightly high-pitched. I heard the door slide open, followed by the sound of the inner screen gliding open. On the other side of it was Samantha, kneeling gracefully with her fingertips touching the floor as she bowed. "You've helped us so much." When she looked up, she was smiling. Her beautiful smile had me flustered. Just the two of us in the room. Realizing the situation, my heart began pounding wildly. Then I noticed the wooden box beside her, the one I had returned earlier. Gently, Samantha ran her hand over the box and looked at me intently. I'd love to hear the story behind these tools. At her calm request, I found myself nodding. About that, my grandfather was the original gardener for the Willow Inn. Samantha nodded softly as I began to explain. My family's home is about a 2-hour drive from the Willow Inn, quite far away. But my grandfather looked after the Willow Inn's gardens because he and Samantha's grandfather had been friends. Sometimes, he'd bring us along, my grandparents, my parents, and me, to stay at the Willow Inn while he worked. Even as a kid, I loved the baths with my father and grandfather. And I'd practically jump for joy whenever I heard we'd be staying at the Willow Inn. However, after Samantha's grandfather passed away, a series of unfortunate events began to befall her family. At first, a hot springs town, including the Willow Inn, was struck by a natural disaster. My grandfather helped with the recovery for free, but once the guests stopped coming, they were slow to return. During that time, my grandfather also passed away. It was a sudden stroke. When my father took over, the contract with the Willow Inn remained, but with the lingering absence of guests, the inn soon fell into financial hardship. Eventually, the Willow Inn informed us that they had to end the contract. My father, feeling grateful to the inn that had treated my grandfather so well, insisted he would continue the work for free until they got back on their feet. However, they turned down the offer, saying it would be wrong to take advantage of a professional gardener that way. And just like that, the long-standing connection between our landscaping business and the Willow Inn was severed. As a farewell, my father brought specially crafted tools, tended to the courtyard, and gifted the tools to the inn. Then he asked that they at least use these to maintain the garden. After that, our family stopped staying at the Willow Inn. Whenever he looked at the garden, he'd feel the urge to jump in and work. So our family trips began to take us to other places. When I finished telling the story, Samantha let out a soft sigh. I'd heard a bit about the circumstances, but I didn't know it was like that. Even though we ended the contract for our own reasons, your family gave us such fine tools. Gently stroking the wooden box, Samantha looked over at me. "So, why is it that you're a former gardener, Jake?" Forgive my curiosity, but I just can't help wondering, after all. The courtyard looked stunning today. Her question was blunt, but somehow, I didn't feel hurt by it. I ran the business into the ground. I tried to laugh it off, but I felt a prickling behind my nose. I forced a smile to keep from tearing up. My father passed away recently, so I took over, but with this baby face and skinny frame, it was hard for people to trust me. On top of that, I'm not great with words. I started in this line of work after high school, though my father had already let me help with simple tasks when I was in middle school. By 30, I had years of experience and skills my father had endorsed. But since I'd mostly been assisting him while he remained active, our longtime clients, who had watched me grow up, doubted my abilities. I tried to beg them to at least look at my technique, but I couldn't get the words out right. Gone were the days when I could rely on long-term relationships and just keep the work going. Now, even as a skilled tradesman, I needed salesmanship to bring in jobs. And with the rise of modern apartment buildings, the demand for garden maintenance was dwindling. The challenges of breaking into new markets with my lack of sales skills were too much for me. On top of my youthful, skinny, unreliable-looking appearance, I was terrible at talking to people. Since our business was family-run, I had no one to back me up and often got shut down at the door. With my mother having passed away a few years earlier, my father had been handling all the accounting, but now that was neglected too. And the business became unsustainable. So recently, I filed for dissolution, for better or worse. When I finished explaining, Samantha looked down. That must have been incredibly difficult. The genuine sympathy in her words nearly broke me. No, it's my own doing. I ignored everything, sales, accounting, and even my skills, assuming my father would always be around. I suppose I had it coming. But I straightened up with a renewed sense of clarity. Today, working on the courtyard, I realized I still love being a gardener. I'd been wondering whether I should try to get a job under another gardener or switch fields entirely. But now I think I want to give it another shot as a gardener. Thank you for giving me the push I needed. I bowed deeply to Samantha. For a moment, she looked surprised, but then she smiled brightly. Well then, how about working here with us? Her unexpected offer left me with my mouth agape. Ha! At my dumbfounded response, Samantha smiled and held out the wooden box to me. Would you consider taking care of our courtyard using these tools? Would you help me look after this precious garden of ours? The unexpected proposal made me swallow hard. I realize it's audacious to ask after we terminated our contract, but guests are returning, and after today's interview, I expect we'll get more reservations. I'd been thinking of hiring a professional gardener again, so... She glanced at me. If you'd be willing, would you consider working here, Jake? I found myself flustered, unable to respond. No, but if someone like me with this kind of look is seen out in the inn's courtyard, it might make people lose trust. The scars from being judged by my appearance weren't easy to shake. But Samantha laughed warmly. I'm asking you because I trust your skills. I need you. I won't change my mind over something as superficial as looks. Her firm words brought tears to my eyes. However, I'll also need your help with some behind-the-scenes work, aside from the gardening. If that's difficult, please tell me. She added with a gentle smile. I had no hesitation. I'll do it. My simple response made Samantha's eyes widen in surprise. I continued, brimming with excitement. Yes. Please, let me do it. Even with the behind-the-scenes work. I'll give it my all. I'd been eager for this. The hedges around the bath, the trees surrounding the inn. They weren't neglected, not at all. But if I were to look after them, I'd want to clear out the leaves floating in the bath regularly. How would I manage it? How would I shape the hedges around the bath? These were things I'd found myself thinking about more than once. When I shared this, Samantha raised her brows in a sympathetic smile and bowed slightly. I'm so sorry if my amateur care left you itching to get involved. I placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. No. I think you've done a wonderful job. But please, let me use the skills I've developed here at the Willow Inn. And that was how I took my first step as a gardener and support staff at the Willow Inn. A few months passed. I worked as a gardener, and I also helped with kitchen prep and cleaning at the Willow Inn. Every day, I threw myself into the work, tending to the garden, cleaning, and prepping ingredients. Whenever I had a moment to spare, I'd work on the garden trees. Knowing that my grandfather and father had once tended to these same trees only made me feel closer to them. With a gentle touch, I'd talk to the plants as though caring for them directly. "The heat's finally easing up, huh? How are you doing? It's going to get chilly in the mornings and evenings soon." While I was talking to the trees, I heard a soft giggle from behind. Turning around, I saw Samantha standing there. It almost makes me jealous. "Jake, it seems like these trees are the most important thing to you," she teased, smiling. During my onboarding, I'd learned Samantha was 2 years older than me and, of course, my employer. But she treated me with a friendliness that felt closer than with the other staff. "Oh, hi. Trees grow beautifully when you talk to them and give them attention." I stammered, still not quite sure how to interact with her now that I was no longer a guest but her employee. Samantha let out a soft sigh. "What do you think? Would help me grow beautifully?" She mused, gazing up at the sky with a tone that left me unsure if she was joking or serious. "Do you think I'm doing a good job as proprietress?" she asked suddenly, and I nodded without hesitation. Samantha's skill and dedication were remarkable. I'd learned that she, too, had lost her parents in an accident. Thrust into the role unexpectedly, she'd used the insurance money from her parents' accident to revitalize the inn. She researched various inns, focused on guest needs, allocated a budget, and even ran advertisements. She served welcome drinks accompanied by traditional sweets, which she also made available for purchase in the lobby. Guests could, of course, enjoy tea in the lobby as well. Thanks to the boost from a local TV feature a few months ago, not only did they see an increase in overnight guests, but also in visitors coming for the tea and sweets set or to use the day spa. She was now exploring ways to expand the sweet selection and looking into selling them online. Through her efforts, Samantha had transformed the traditional inn she inherited into a popular, often fully booked destination. It surprised me to hear her doubt whether she was fulfilling her role properly. "Today, I think the inn's fully booked, right?" And there were a lot of families in the lobby earlier. I could hear kids laughing. "It's impressive." "Really?" I said, though I was aware my words lacked eloquence. Samantha sighed again. "Sometimes I wonder if this is what my parents would have wanted." The Willow Inn was originally a serene, traditional inn. When I stayed here as a kid, and even a few months ago during my retreat, the hot springs were practically private, the lobby was always quiet. And you could read a newspaper in peace. But ever since the TV feature, the lobby has been lively with young voices throughout the day, and there's always someone in the bath whenever I go. The spacious baths still feel calm, even with other guests around, and it's a good thing to have more guests. Yet, it's true that the inn's atmosphere has shifted from its former tranquility. Some even say that by spending her parents' insurance money on these changes, Samantha has ruined what her family built. I resented those heartless words. I think it's wonderful to have the inn filled with voices from people of all ages, I said firmly. Samantha's eyes went wide with surprise. "Everyone sits and enjoys tea while looking out at the garden, right? Even if young guests get excited in the parking lot, they quiet down once they're inside. After listening to your and the staff's explanations, they sit peacefully, gazing at the courtyard as they sip tea. Seeing the satisfied expressions on their faces, knowing we've created a calm space for them, makes me really happy. Though the inn can be lively, it's never noisy, it's cheerful. And I think it's all thanks to the welcoming atmosphere you, as the proprietress, create. I love this feeling." Samantha's face turned bright red. "What? You love it?" Seeing her flustered expression, I paused, realizing how my words had sounded. "Oh, wait. I didn't mean, not you specifically. I mean the atmosphere, I stopped, suddenly lost in thought. But then, the words slipped out naturally. "No, actually, I do mean you. I've liked you from the moment we met." Samantha's face grew even redder, and she started to panic. Meanwhile, I felt myself growing calmer, my resolve settling. Working here as a gardener makes me happy. But more than anything, being able to work near you makes me happy. My calm words seemed to unnerve her, and she took a few steps back in a fluster. "What, someone like me? Ah." Just then, Samantha stepped back and nearly tripped over a stone, losing her balance. "Watch out." I quickly reached out and wrapped an arm around her back, barely steadying her. Relief washed over me, only to realize her face was right in front of mine. Her face was flushed, and before I knew it, I leaned in and kissed her softly. When our lips parted, Samantha's face was still red, and she gave me an exasperated look. That was a bit forward. I scratched my head, embarrassed. "Sorry, it just happened." She puffed out her cheeks. "You really like a clumsy older woman like me?" The way she asked made me laugh. "Yes. That's one of the things I find charming about you." Hearing this, Samantha leaned in and quickly kissed me back. It was brief, not even a second. "I feel the same way, so, well, I'll get back to work now." She quickly pulled away, making her way out of the courtyard, stumbling here and there but managing not to fall. Watching her, I felt a mix of amusement and affection. A year later, Samantha and I got married. We held the wedding ceremony in the courtyard of the inn that I tended. It was the same place where we shared our first kiss. A small stage was set up in that very spot, and there, we shared our vows in a kiss. As I kissed her in front of the staff and guests, memories flooded my mind. The family trips to the Willow Inn from my childhood, filled with so many happy memories. The years when the Willow Inn's garden was out of my family's reach, and both Samantha and I suffered so many losses of loved ones. I'd nearly lost my own path as a gardener. But then I met Samantha at this inn, cared for the courtyard, and that led to our marriage. It felt as if we'd been guided here by something greater. And I vowed to cherish Samantha, carrying with me the precious memories of my family, as we continued our journey together.